Peppa Pig and the Shape-Shifting Box. A large cardboard box appears in the middle of the living room. For Peppa, even an ordinary box can be exciting. The box starts to move as if it's going for a walk. In Peppa's imagination, the box turns into a train. Moments later, it becomes a spaceship flying into space. Sometimes the simplest things can bring the biggest joy.
Peppa and the shared lunch. Today, there's a new friend, Wendy Wolf, who forgot her lunch.
Hey!
Peppa looks at her 2 sandwiches and thinks of Wendy sitting quietly. Let's share, says Peppa. Wendy smiles happily. Everyone shares their food. The playground fills with laughter. Madame Gazelle smiles. Sharing warms both the heart and the tummy. Peppa and the shared raincoat. It's a rainy day. Peppa wears her raincoat, but George forgot his. George looks cold and sad. Peppa worries for her little brother. Peppa smiles and pulls George under her coat. They giggle together.
Ha!
Mummy Pig brings another coat. You're so sweet when you share. After the rain, the family watches a rainbow. Peppa says, sharing makes everything warmer, even rainy days. Peppa and the shared umbrella. It's a rainy morning, and Peppa brings her favorite pink umbrella. She sees Wendy Wolf getting wet under a tree. Peppa smiles and shares her umbrella with Wendy. They walk together, splashing puddles and singing happily. Madame Gazelle says, sharing is wonderful. Peppa and Wendy smile under the pink umbrella.
Peppa Pig and the clock that rang at the wrong time. Everything is calm and peaceful until the clock suddenly rings, even though it's clearly not the right time. Peppa notices the wall clock. The hands aren't moving, but the bell is very busy. George takes a closer look, and as if answering him, the clock rings again. Peppa gently touches the clock, and it immediately proves that it loves attention. Suddenly, the minute hand spins quickly, as if the clock is trying to catch up with time. In the end, the clock goes quiet again. Peppa and George learn that sometimes time just needs a reminder that everyone is having fun. Peppa Pig and the Shooting Star Train. A shooting star streaks across the night sky, surprising Peppa and George. It lands and turns into a glowing train in their yard. Aha! The train doors open, inviting them aboard. They travel through starry skies past constellations and planets. The train returns them home, leaving a shining star ticket behind.
Peppa and George were walking when they discovered a mysterious vegetable garden with tall, colorful plants. George curiously touched a giant carrot, while Peppa picked up a pumpkin almost as big as her head.
Wow!
Mummy Pig entered the garden, smiling and said, "Look, kids, these vegetables are really special." Peppa and George played hopping through the tall plants, laughing joyfully across the garden. Daddy Pig appeared with a small cart so the whole family could harvest the vegetables together. Finally, the whole family stood in the garden, admiring the colorful pumpkins, carrots, and greens, happily taking a family photo. Peppa Pig and the Forest Walking Adventure. Peppa and George walked along the forest trail, Daddy and Mummy Pig following, with trees green on both sides. Peppa spotted a yellow butterfly flying. George pointed excitedly. Daddy Pig slid lightly on a wet branch. Peppa and George giggled. Mummy Pig picked some wild strawberries and gave them to Peppa and George, both laughing happily. The family stood on a hilltop, looking at the green forest, holding hands and laughing happily. The magical ladder. But this was no ordinary ladder. It began to shake and slowly lift off the ground. Peppa climbed up quickly while George held on tight. Together, they rose higher and higher. The ladder floated past the apple tree, gently knocking apples down into the grass. Finally, the ladder landed back on the ground. Peppa and George tumbled off, laughing all the way. The giant shoe. Peppa and George were stunned when they saw a giant shoe appear in the garden. Peppa immediately turned it into a playground, while George was still wondering, whose shoe could this be? For Peppa, the shoe became the perfect slide. For George, it was more like a treasure chest. Soon, the giant shoe rolled around like a ride, filling the garden with laughter. Peppa and George dashed across the garden, giggling and chasing after the giant shoe as if it were the most magical toy in the world. But the biggest surprise came when Daddy Pig showed up, rolled in another giant shoe. In the end, the family realized that joy needs no reason. Just a pair of oversized shoes and endless imagination. Peppa and George couldn't believe their eyes. A giant truck was parked right in their yard. This truck is not only big but full of strange things inside. Peppa is curious and wants to try them all. George tried to push the giant wheel, but he might need a bit more strength to move it. No worries. Peppa decides to drive the giant truck, but it seems it's not as easy as she thought. Sometimes all it takes is a little push on the gas pedal to start an adventure, even if it's a bit out of control. Finally, the truck stops, and Peppa and George realize one thing. Sometimes the fun starts with the most random things. Today, the pig family is going to the beach. Peppa and George laugh with joy. First, the family stops to admire the bright sun over the sea. Mummy Pig teaches Peppa to share toys. Today, Peppa got a brand new dancing dinosaur. George wanted to play too. Peppa hugged her toy tightly, not wanting to share. George looked sad. Mummy Pig said softly, "Sharing makes toys more special, Peppa." Peppa thought for a moment, then smiled and gave the toy to George. They laughed together. Daddy Pig cheered. See? Sharing brings more fun. The family laughed together. Peppa Pig and the Talking Rainbow. After the rain, a rainbow appeared, smiling at Peppa. The rainbow greeted Peppa warmly. Peppa jumped in surprise, while George laughed joyfully. Each color has a feeling. Red for joy, blue for calm. Peppa and George danced beneath it, surrounded by sparkles. As the rainbow faded, Peppa still heard laughter in the wind. Maybe the rainbow was still watching. Picnic day. Today, Peppa and George are very excited because the family is going on a picnic. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig are ready too. The whole family gets in the car. Peppa loves going out, and so does George. Daddy Pig spreads the blanket, and Mummy Pig puts down the picnic basket. Peppa chases a pretty butterfly, and George runs after his sister. Peppa tries to catch the butterfly.
Peppa Pig and the Playful Wind. It looks like a perfectly normal afternoon until the wind arrives. The wind blows through the garden as if it wants to join the fun. Leaves begin to swirl around, flying everywhere. Peppa tries to catch a leaf, but the wind is always one step ahead. After a while, the wind seems to get tired and calms down. Peppa and George learn that sometimes invisible things can bring the biggest fun. Peppa Pig and the door that wouldn't open. It's a perfect day, but the door to the garden refuses to cooperate. Peppa pulls, George pushes, the door chooses to stay completely still. Maybe they're standing in the wrong place. They try again, but the door doesn't change its mind. When nothing works, Peppa does the most important thing, takes a short break. And then, when no one touches it, the door slowly opens on its own. Peppa and George learn that sometimes the hardest things become easy when you stop trying too hard. Peppa Pig and the Flying Umbrella. It looks like it's going to rain today, and Peppa has her umbrella ready. But Peppa soon discovers the wind has other plans. In a flash, the umbrella flies into the air without asking anyone. The umbrella looks very happy, as if it has always dreamed of flying. Finally, it lands gently on the grass, satisfied after its short adventure. Peppa learns that sometimes even familiar things want to explore the world. Peppa Pig and the hat that wouldn't stay still. Peppa loves her new hat. It looks perfect and fits just right. But the hat doesn't seem to agree with its position. Peppa carefully fixes the hat, and it immediately chooses a new spot. George finds this very funny. The hat looks like it's playing a game. Finally, the hat decides to rest for a while on the grass. Peppa learns that sometimes being comfortable is better than wearing a perfect hat. Peppa Pig and the strange-sounding trumpet. Peppa finds a toy trumpet that looks very ordinary. But when she tries to blow it, the sound is very different. George is startled at first, then becomes curious. Peppa blows more gently, and the trumpet immediately changes its mood. It turns out The trumpet likes to be played in its own way. Peppa and George learn that sometimes listening is just as important as making noise. Peppa Pig and the Noisy Bucket. Peppa notices an ordinary bucket that doesn't seem ordinary today. One gentle tap, and the bucket replies with a fun sound. George taps harder, and the bucket sounds even more excited. Soon the bucket turns into an unexpected musical instrument. After the performance, the bucket needs a little rest. Peppa and George learn that sometimes fun comes from the simplest things.
Go to a restaurant.
Yahoo!
Today is a very fun day. Peppa, George, and Daddy Pig are going out. At the cinema, Gerald Giraffe has just finished watching a film and meets Peppa's family.
Hi!
George is starting to feel hungry. Gerald Giraffe has an idea. They will all go to the restaurant. A colorful rainy day. It is raining outside. Peppa and George cannot play in the garden. Peppa goes into the house. Daddy Pig is watching TV. Oh, Daddy Pig has an idea. He brings out a box of crayons. Peppa wants to draw, and George chooses yellow for Peppa. And Peppa draws her favorite yellow dinosaur. Library. Today, Peppa and George are going to the bookstore. Come on, family, let's get in the car. Peppa and George really love going to the bookstore. There are so many books to choose from. Peppa picks a princess book. And George chooses a dinosaur book.
Peppa Pig and the Shape-Shifting Box. Peppa notices a very big cardboard box. It looks like just a box. But to Peppa, the box feels like a secret place. George gives the box a little push and the adventure begins. The box suddenly turns into a very special vehicle. In their imagination, the box can travel anywhere. Peppa and George learn that sometimes a simple box can hold a whole world of fun.
Peppa was surprised to see a strange hat on the grass.
Huh? Whoa!
George ran over and touched it, lights twinkling from the hat.
Whoa!
Peppa put the hat on. Bubbles of light floated across the garden. Magical indeed. George tried the hat too, bubbles swirling around them, making them laugh out loud. The bubbles rose and settled on the tree branches, sparkling in the sunlight. They took off the hat, bubbles faded, but the magical joy lingered in the garden.
Peppa Pig and the Lost Balloon. Today, Peppa and George are playing with a very special balloon. A playful breeze lifts the balloon out of Peppa's hand. The balloon slowly floats over familiar places in the garden. It seems to explore the world all by itself. Peppa and George learn that letting things go can be fun too. Even though the balloon is gone, the happiness stays.
Peppa Pig and the Fishing Day Adventure. Peppa and George brought fishing rods to the lake. Daddy and Mummy Pig following, the lake sparkling in the sun. Peppa cast her line into the water. George watched the surface, eagerly waiting. Daddy Pig accidentally dropped his fishing rod into the lake. Peppa and George giggled. Peppa caught a flower floating on the water. George cheered, and the whole family laughed with delight. The family packed up. Peppa and George waved goodbye to the lake, promising to come back next time. Peppa and George ran outside to play as the rain started. They jumped into puddles, splashing water everywhere. Mummy Pig brought raincoats and reminded them, "Be careful, don't slip." Daddy Pig appeared with a big umbrella, sheltering Peppa and George from the rain. Peppa found a giant puddle, carefully jumped in, and laughed with joy. Finally, the whole family stood under the umbrella, watching Peppa and George dance in the rain, laughing together. Peppa's Forest Picnic. Today, Peppa's family goes on a picnic in the forest. George chases a butterfly, making Peppa giggle. Mummy Pig sets up lunch while Daddy Pig finds a shady spot. Peppa shares apples with everyone, and George hugs her happily. family relaxes together, smiling under the peaceful sky.
Peppa Pig and the Giant Car. Peppa and George are surprised to see a giant car blocking their gate. The wheels of the car are even taller than Peppa. The huge car casts a long shadow over the garden. Inside, the car looks like a moving room. As the car slowly moves, the whole garden seems to shake. Peppa and George realize that sometimes the bigger something is, the more curious it becomes.
Peppa and George lay on the grass, watching fluffy white clouds drift across the sky.
Peppa Pig and the strange noise in the garden. The garden is calm and quiet until a strange rustling sound comes from the bushes.
Hey! Hey!
The noise isn't loud, but it's curious enough that Peppa and George can't ignore it. Peppa bravely moves closer, while George chooses a safer spot behind her. It turns out the sound was just the wind, but Peppa and George aren't fully convinced yet. And then, the loudest noise in the garden comes from George stepping on a dry leaf. Peppa and George learn that sometimes the scariest things are just in our imagination.
Peppa and George brought the big building block set from the house to the yard, excited to start the game. Mommy Pig spread a large blanket on the grass, making it comfortable for Peppa and George to play with their Lego. Peppa started building a beautiful castle with the large blocks, while George carefully placed the smaller pieces around it. Daddy Pig joined in, trying to build a tall tower with the blocks, making the whole family laugh. Mummy Pig added special blocks to the castle, creating flags and flowers, and the whole family clapped and cheered. The family sat around the Lego castle, laughing happily and taking photos of their wonderful creation. Peppa and George were amazed when a giant ball rolled toward them. The ball was too big, but Peppa didn't give up and decided to push it. The rolling ball created funny circles, making Peppa laugh non-stop. George joined in, helping Peppa to control the giant ball together. When the ball hit a puddle, huge splashes sprayed everywhere, making them laugh even more. Finally, they realize that sometimes the greatest fun is just a giant ball and your own laughter. It's a beautiful morning at Peppa's house. George Pig really loves to play outside. Mommy, Daddy, and Peppa have already gone out too. Hop in the car. Time to hit the road. George Pig loves going shopping with his family. Peppa and George love going shopping.
Hey!
First, we need to find the bananas. Peppa Pig and the Mushroom Picking Adventure. Peppa and George took baskets into the forest. Daddy and Mummy Pig followed, everyone excited to explore. Peppa saw brown mushrooms growing on the grass, pointed and cheered. George jumped with joy. Daddy Pig showed Peppa how to pick mushrooms gently. Mummy Pig took photos. George picked a big mushroom, dropping smaller ones. Peppa laughed and helped him pick them up. The family placed mushrooms into their baskets, laughing the forest fresh and green. The family left the forest with full baskets. Mummy Pig promised to make a delicious mushroom soup.
Peppa Pig and the Rainbow Door. A beam of sunlight forms a bright rainbow on the wall, catching Peppa and George's attention. The rainbow turns into a glowing door, gently inviting them inside. They step through and discover a colorful valley with low-flowing clouds. They slide down rainbow hills surrounded by sparkling light. The door brings them home, leaving a tiny glowing spark as a memory. Peppa Pig and the melting cake. Peppa is very excited about the cake, especially on a sunny day like this. But the sun has its own plans for the cake. The cake seems to be changing shape right before their eyes. Peppa tries to save the cake, but the sunshine doesn't cooperate. Even though it's no longer perfect, the cake still looks delicious. Peppa and George learn that sometimes fun doesn't need to be perfect to be sweet.